This week, we're talking about building a supportive ecosystem.
You are listening to Love Your Job Before You Leave It, the podcast for ambitious, high-achieving women who are ready to stop feeling stressed about work and kiss burnout goodbye forever. Whether you're starting a business or staying in your day job, this show will give you the coaching and guidance you need to start loving your work today. Here's your host, career coach Corey Lynn.
Hello, darlings. Happy Wednesday. I hope this finds you very well. I'm doing okay. I'm a little sad. So I have been watching the L Word Generation Q, which came out a while ago. I think it started coming out before the pandemic, and I don't even know when the other two seasons came out, but I have memories of watching season one at friends' houses in Seattle. And I sort of didn't keep up with it. I often don't keep up with shows as they come out live. The only reason I watched it when it came out is because so many friends were watching it that we were having little watch parties, which was super fun. And I did enjoy that. But I like to binge things. So I like to wait until they're out, and then I can just watch them as fast as I want to. So it kind of fell off my radar for a while. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to watch that now. And then when I went to watch it, I realized that it had been canceled after season 3. And then I was super bummed, but I still wanted to see what happened because I had followed these characters through season 1, and I watched all the original L Word seasons also. So some of the characters are in both, right? The Generation Q is kind of a continuation with new characters. It's not a total spinoff. Anyways, so I was preemptively already sad that it was going to not keep going forever and ever, amen. But I watched it anyways, and it was really enjoyable. I really liked the L Word Generation Q. And then of course, I ran out of episodes because there were only 2 seasons for me to watch. And it was funny, as it was coming down to the final episode of season 3, I just slowed down the speed at which I was watching them. It was I just was no, I was grumpy and upset that it wasn't going to continue. And then I kind of avoided it a little bit because I was trying to, it's it wasn't really savoring. It was sort of the antithesis of savoring, avoidance, where I was yeah, I don't want it to be over. So I'm just going to ignore it. And then finally I did watch it a few days ago. And of course, I don't think they knew the show was going to get canceled. So there's lots of, there was some stuff that kind of came together, but there were lots of little pieces of what will happen with this and what will happen with these people. And I just feel a bittersweet longing and sadness that I actually did look up, is there fan fiction? And there is, but fan fiction is usually about alternate universes, or I don't know, usually I don't read that much fan fiction, although I do like it, but it doesn't carry on the main line of the show. And that's what I really want. So I'm just feeling some sad feelings, and that's okay. It's a totally normal part of human life. Feeling disappointed is not my favorite emotion, but it is a beautiful thing. There was something I really liked and enjoyed, and it's over now. And that, tends to be what happens with everything we like and enjoy, because things are finite, right? Even life. So just to go super dark and deep right away, happy Wednesday. You're welcome. Anyways, that's not what we're going to talk about today, but if you are having some sadness or some feelings of disappointment, I do have some really good podcasts on those as well, and they're available for you for whenever you need them. But today we're going to talk about how to build a supportive ecosystem. And this is something I was thinking about because I was coaching a client and they were talking about wanting to do something, and I don't actually even remember which client it was. Usually I ask the client permission, but I don't remember who I was coaching about this. But basically I was what needs to be in place for you to be able to do the thing that the client was talking about wanting to do. And so originally this podcast episode was going to be about the idea of prerequisites, what are the prerequisites you need to have in place? But I sat down to kind of write my thoughts out a little bit, which is actually really unusual. I just get on here and kind of talk about my ideas. But this time I was let me think through an example. And as I was thinking through the example, I was oh, this isn't just about prerequisites. This is about building a supportive ecosystem. Or the first phrase I actually came up with was a success ecosystem. What is the ecosystem that supports success for you? And there's 2 layers to this. There's what is the ecosystem that supports success for you generally, in an ongoing way, a maintenance way. And then there's also what is the ecosystem that supports success for very specific goals that you have? So those two ecosystems may be the same, but they may not be the same, right? If you have a very specific goal you're working on, that may require like a customized ecosystem for that specific goal. And then I think there's a general, like, in order for you to be satisfied, in order for you to feel, peaceful and content, what needs to be in place in your life. So I think it's easier to talk about like with a specific goal ecosystem. And the example I came up with when I was writing notes before recording this was the idea of like starting a business and running a business. And it's interesting because like when you think about the idea of prerequisites, I do think some people use prerequisites to slow themselves down. They're like, oh, there's like too many things I would have to have in place first. And then they kind of get bogged down in the details of those too many things, then they never like get going. And then I think other people have the opposite thing, right? And neither of these are a problem. They're just like kind of tendencies to be aware of. So what some people do is they just start something without figuring out what the skills and habits and whatever they need to have in place are, and then they figure it out as they go. And I think there can be benefits to both of those ways of doing things. And there can be drawbacks as well. And I think framing them up in the idea of an ecosystem can be really useful. Like, what do you actually want to make sure is already in place in the ecosystem before you get started or like as you're getting started? And what could you build into the ecosystem as you go? So, like, as an example, when you think about starting a business, there were a lot of things I did not have in place. It was a bit spontaneous. I mean, I've been like talking about it for years, but like kind of making the decision that it was the time and I was going to do the thing, leave the job and start the business. It was a bit like spontaneous and like kind of a bit tantrumy, if I'm being really honest. Like my coach at the time was like, okay, we're either going to focus on you like going all in on loving this job, or we're going to focus on you going all in and building a business. And even though my podcast is called Love Your Job Before You Leave It, I decided to go all in and building a business. And there were a lot of great things about that. There were also a lot of not so great things, which is why I think like you can do it either way. But the skill of like loving your job is actually a great thing to learn while you're still getting like a great paycheck and healthcare, because I then learned that in my business while trying to support myself with my business. And again, I wouldn't necessarily go back and change it, but benefits and drawbacks to everything always. Okay. So a lot of the things I didn't have in place, but one thing I did have in place when I quit my job was I had some money saved up. Now, in retrospect, it wasn't very much money. Like at the time I was like, this is so much money. But like people are always like, oh, have like 6 months of like runway or like 12 months to like be able to support yourself. That's not how much money I had. I'll just share with you. I had $15,000 in cash, which is a lot of money, but also like I was like, living in Seattle actually with like really for Seattle, extremely cheap rent, but it wasn't like that much runway. And so there was a period of time where I had spent all that money and I wasn't really making money yet. And it was not my super favorite thing. It was like very uncomfortable. But at the time, like $15,000 was enough for me to be like, okay, I have this in place. I have these like resources. And I'd paid off my student loans earlier that year. I'd gotten, I think, a bonus. I guess we got like yearly bonuses when I was my corporate job. And I had used that bonus to pay off my student loans. And then I had used the money also to buy the coaching package that I was in as a client, where I got the coaching of like, love it or leave it, basically. So I had no debt and I had cash. And so that was part of what allowed me to make the somewhat spontaneous decision to like leave the job. And there were also other things I had in place that I don't know that I was really cognizant of. But when I was making my list, I was like, oh yeah. So the list that I wrote is like, what are the skills you need to have? What are the habits you need to have in place? Like, is there an amount of money you need to have to like feel like you have a supportive ecosystem for the whatever particular goal you're working on? Housing is always a really big concern. Like if your housing doesn't feel stable, it's going to be much harder probably to focus on a goal or something like that. But also is like the particular kind of housing you have, is your housing arrangement conducive to the goal or conducive to the ecosystem you're trying to build? Another thing I put on here was like sleep, right? So for me, sleep is really, really important. And probably sleep is really, really important for you, whether you like think it is or not, because like human bodies need sleep to function well. And so like I think about people having really big goals or things they want to work on, but like if you are not getting good sleep, or like if you are struggling in other ways, like listen, sometimes some of us struggle with sleep. I actually am one of those people. And so I'm not saying like you have to be a perfect or great sleeper in order to go after your goals. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I am saying like if I put in place the work and the effort to have like sleep habits that really support me and that I generally get good for me sleep doing, then that ecosystem supports everything else I want to do. And that really matters for me. Like other resources you may need to have in place besides just like financial resources, is there equipment that you need to have? So these are just like all of the things that I wrote down off the top of my head. And there's probably more, but I think the big ones are like skills and habits, right? And so for starting a business or like running a business, there's skills like getting clients, serving clients, but there's also skills like the backside of the business, like billing, there's marketing, there's like dealing with your taxes, there's dealing with like all kinds of forms and paperwork and like making sure you have the proper licenses, there's getting insurance, probably like depending on what kind of business you are. And if you're a business, like I'm a business that serves people with a service that is coaching, but if you're a business that creates products, then there's all kinds of like skills and habits you need to have in place around, and maybe relationships around like who are your suppliers and like where do your products come from and like how do they get from wherever they're made to you and then how do they get from you to your clients and stuff like that. So there's all these layers of things. And like, I'm not saying this for you to get overwhelmed by them because again, like we don't want you to get so bogged down in this that you don't get started. We just want you to think about like, what's it going to be really meaningful for me to have in place before I get started? Like what's the version 1.0 of the ecosystem that I want to have in place before I get started and then get started. And then like, what are the additional pieces you want to have in place? And keep in mind that like, again, it can be really beautiful to put things in place before you get started. And then you're definitely still going to have to put some in place after you get started because some stuff like you just don't know you need it until you know you need it, or you just don't know to even put it in place. And then one day someone's like, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, oh shit. For me, I was like, someone was like, oh, Seattle business license. And I was like, what? So like I had to get a Seattle business license after I'd already been in business for a while. And like, I, basically paid some fees because I told them like, oh, here's when I actually started my business. And they were like, cool. So I had to like buy 2 years worth of Seattle business licenses at once. But it wasn't like I was in big trouble. Like you're probably going to miss some stuff when you're setting up your ecosystem. Don't beat yourself up about it. Like that's just like how shit goes. And then you just have to navigate it once you learn about it. Okay. And so those are the business things, but like, let's also remember personal habits, right? So like for me, my sleeping habit is really meaningful. My habit of taking like long walks every day is really important for me. And like, it's important for me in how I feel in my physical body, but I actually think it's also important for me in how I feel mentally and how quick my brain works and how like readily I'm able to like use my faculties. And then I do like physical therapy most days. And that's, to help me feel good in my body, which maybe isn't like directly tied to like the ecosystem of success for my business. But in some ways it is, because if my body is causing me pain or like last year I had knee pain. Was it last year? I think it was last year or 2 years ago. There have been so many times in my life when I've had knee pain. So I had some knee pain and like there was the pain of it. And there was like the rehab activities of like going to physical therapy, like to the actual physical therapy's office and then like doing the physical therapy things at home. But there was the mental anguish too. And we talk so much about mental anguish on this podcast of like, my brain being like, oh my God, like what if it never doesn't hurt to walk again? Or like, what if I can't take long walks for the rest of my life because I'm used to being able to take these long walks. And then when I had the knee pain, like there were some days I could barely make it around a block or 2 blocks. And it, it was where I was at the time and that was fine. But then like the mental anguish was like, what if it's like this forever and like blah, blah, and like grieving and then like being mad at myself because like, did I injure myself with like running or like whatever activity I had done before the knee pain? So in that way, there was actually like a high cost to the ecosystem, like beyond just the actual pain, like there was this like mental cost. And then I had to like coach myself about it and soothe myself about it and comfort myself about it. So even though the knee pain doesn't seem to be directly related to like business goals, running a business, it can kind of like impact that ecosystem anyways. So if you have a goal that you're working on, either like a specific goal or an ongoing goal. Like in a way, starting a business is like a short goal, but running a business is an ongoing goal, right? It's sort of like having a life that's wildly delicious and delightful. That's an ongoing goal. You're going to need an ongoing ecosystem. And the ecosystem will probably change as you have like different micro goals or like little interests or like, particular obsessions that like run for a certain amount of time. As those come along, it'll like ebb and flow. But like, what do you want to have in place? And what can you learn as you go? So if you either like have a specific goal you've been working on, or maybe you have a goal that you haven't been working on, or if your life is just like not feeling as yummy and delightful as you want it to, how can this idea of building a supportive ecosystem help you do whatever it is that you want to do, whether that's like upgrade your current life a little bit here and there, or whether that's like quit your day job, launch a business and be, creating $250,000 in revenue a year every year, starting in like the next 12 or 18 months. And of course, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be like a business or career goal. This could be like, how do I create a supportive ecosystem for myself so I can show up to my relationship with my significant other with like kindness and boundaries? What ecosystem would you need to have in place so that you could show up that way in your intimate relationship? Or maybe you're like trying to make a big decision in your life, like a decision about like whether or not you want to have kids, or whether or not you want to move to Iceland, or whether or not you want to go back to school to study a different industry or a different like kind of thing to do in your life. What kind of ecosystem do you need to have in place to make that decision? What's the place from which you want to make the decision? And then once you make the decision, what ecosystems do you need to put in place to support you in creating whatever outcome you want in a way that feels delicious to you? Because here's the thing, a lot of people know how to create things in a way that feels fucking terrible. A lot of people know how to create things from anxiety. A lot of people know how to create things like while feeling super fucking stressed about it. A lot of people know how to create things because like they'll feel so guilty if they don't work on them. But that feels fucking terrible. And we burn out that way. And then we run out of energy. And then we like eventually can't prod ourselves to do anything with those approaches. So like, what kind of ecosystem do you need to go after the things you want to go after in a way that feels effervescent and joyful and alive and meaningful and yummy? I'm so excited about this idea and I'm so excited about this framework. And I really think it could help you move forward on things that you've been struggling to move forward on. I think the framework of like, well, what needs to be in place in the ecosystem? And then like, don't get bogged down in designing and like implementing the whole ecosystem. Like you can start the ecosystem just with like, oh, well, I think one thing that could be useful here is like getting my sleep in order. So like this week I'm going to like work on getting my sleep in order, and I'm not going to judge and shame myself that I'm not writing blogs, or I'm not going to judge and shame myself that I'm not like, sending out intro emails. I'm not going to judge and shame myself that I'm not like having that difficult conversation with my wife yet. For now, what you're going to do is you're just going to like implement the one thing into the ecosystem that you decided you were implementing, and you're going to praise and celebrate yourself every step of the way, because what we praise and celebrate, we do more of. Okay, so come find me on Instagram and tell me, what are you going to use the supportive ecosystem to facilitate in your life and career? And you can tell me publicly on one of my posts, or you can just DM me privately and let me know what you're using this or any podcast tool to create, because I'm obsessed with these tools, and I'm obsessed with building a good and meaningful life and helping y'all get to build good and meaningful lives too. And I want to know what y'all are up to. So come let me know. And if you want to work with me privately on creating a supportive ecosystem that sets you up for success with your specific goals and just generally in life so that you can have a yummy, wildly satisfying life, I do currently have space for a few one-on-one clients, and I would love to have a conversation with you about what you want to work on and what you want to accomplish and whether I would be a good fit for that. And I also have another group of Satisfied as Fuck coming up very soon. So if you would rather do that work with me and a group of amazing women and assigned female at birth non-binary people, you are welcome to join us over there. It's going to be a fucking riot and a delight, and we're going to get a lot of shit done. And if you want something just a little bit more extra, I do have my year-long coaching and mentorship program, Unhinged as Fuck, where we work together with one-on-one coaching for a year and multiple in-person or virtual deep dive days where we spend the whole day coaching and figuring out a different area or multiple areas of your life. And if you're ready just to like dip your toe in the waters, I do have a totally free small group coaching call at the end of July. I think it's July 25th at 12 p.m. Pacific, but you can get all the details by getting the link in my Instagram bio, and we'll put it in the show notes too. All right, that's what I have for y'all today. Have a glorious Wednesday, or if you're feeling like me, like glorious and sad, glorious and disappointed, because y'all, it can be both. All right, have a lovely week. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Love Your Job Before You Leave It. We'll have another episode for you next week. And in the meantime, if you're feeling super fired up, head on over to CoreyLynn.com for more guidance and resources.